It's never too late to start looking towards next year's NFL draft. And when it comes to 2025, it's all eyes on Byers. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, I'm Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusions. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode, excuse me. Okay, we're back. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Go to FanDuel.com/Locked On to make every moment more. If you're new to FanDuel, you get $150 back in bonus bets as long as you put down a $5 bet, win or lose. We wrap up today's episode with a look at Grambling versus LSU women's basketball. There's a lot of trends that will be continuing from LSU in this game that they'll be having with Grambling, and I think I want to explore it because it's a lot about LSU's relationship with HBCUs. Prior to that, we'll have a two-part about the 2025 NFL draft and some of the HBCU prospects to keep an eye on. I'll list out three of them in segment 2, but I'm going to kick it off with the premier prospect, in my opinion, and that is Jada Byers. I love Jada Byers, y'all. Like, I'm not even going to sit here and lie to you. I've been on this train since last year. This is the type of player who, on a normal basis, we see leave an HBCU. And if we don't see him leave an HBCU, we usually will see him leave the Division II ranks. Jada Byers is the running back of Virginia Union, and let me tell you, if you've been watching HBCU football and paying attention, because you might not always see the D2 teams on TV. So if you've been paying attention to HBCU football for 2 years, there's no way you should not be familiar with the name Jada Byers. However, I'm going to get you real acquainted with Mr. Byers in today's segment. So it's never too early to look at the NFL draft, in my opinion. If you ask, there's already mock drafts for 2025 coming out in the first round. It's never too early to look forward to the draft. And I know that HBCUs have a interesting, let's use that word, relationship with the NFL draft. However, I'm not going to be one of those people who say, yeah, I'm just going to sit on the sideline. Jada Byers is the guy. And next year, Jada Byers is the prospect that I'm the most interested to watch. Like Pac said, it's all eyes on Byers because he is a Division II running back, and we'll get into why that's very important. But more important than just being a D2 running back, this guy is a guy. Jada Byers, as a sophomore, was a 2,000-yard player. 1920 as a running back, added an extra 100 and change as a receiver to make that 2,000 mark. You could have a strong argument that in 2022 as a sophomore, he was the best Division II running back in the nation. I think he could have been the HBCU player of the year, but Shedeur Sanders went crazy that year, so things happen. But this guy went absolutely ballistic that year. And that was the year of the running backs, too. And he was the one who stood at the top. You had Bashul Tootin that year. Jarvian Howard had his best year that year. That was a strong year for HBCU running backs, but nobody had a year like Jada Byers did in 2022. So when I'm looking at him as a prospect, at what point do I begin to sell him? I sell him on his touchdown production. Because one thing you can never say about Jada Byers, and I know that last year was riddled with injuries, one thing you can never say about Jada Byers is that he doesn't know how to get into the end zone. Because as a freshman, he had 12 touchdowns on the ground. and that's the least amount of touchdowns he's had on the ground or altogether, clearly, since then. 16 touchdowns, or excuse me, 19 touchdowns as a sophomore, 16 touchdowns this past year, and he missed games. His junior year wasn't as good as his sophomore year, but a lot of that had to do with some injuries and also some added focus, but he still hit 1,100 yards. He was still the 10th best as far as yards per game rushing in the nation on the D2 ranks. But you look at the injury, it took him out of a couple of games. And then in the game he came back, it was a real lackluster performance. And I think that's because he had to get his legs underneath him. But even going into a junior year, even coming out of a junior year where he had to deal with a lot more injuries, he was still top 10 D2 all around. Coming out of a season where he had to deal with injuries and he missed the part of multiple games, he still was top 10 in the nation in yards per game. He was still top 20 in the nation in total yards. This is a player who has multiple 200-yard games. And if you want to speak about playing in big-time moments, he has over 100 yards in both of the playoff games that he's performed in. Jada Byers checks so many boxes. However, what boxes don't he check? Jada Byers checks so many boxes, but what boxes does he fail to check? And I'm just going to be honest with y'all, D2 running back is not a good box. When you look at the history of Division II, not even history, when you look at the current landscape of Division II running backs in the league at the start of last season, there's 6 guys. Mind you, we're speaking about draft stock here. Craig Reynolds, undrafted free agent. Emmanuel Wilson, undrafted free agent. Austin Eckler, undrafted free agent. CJ Ham, undrafted free agent. Alex Arma, 6th round pick, 2017. So of the 6 Division II running backs that are currently in the NFL at the start of last season, that were on a roster at the start of last season, only 1 was drafted. So if we're speaking about draft stock, that doesn't really work in Byers' favor. But then also, if you're looking at his stature is a big problem because he's only 5'7". Byers is a short running back. And Eckler is too. I get it. But Eckler is also a crazy receiver. We'll see if they do that more with Jada Byers this year. But I'll tell you one thing that he has in his tuck. Jada Byers also knows how to return kicks. And he's averaged over 20 yards per kick return in both of his in his freshman and his sophomore year. I got to check his junior year again. But in the freshman and sophomore year, Jada Byers averaged 20 yards per kick return. The problem is it's not his specialty. So at a 5'7" running back, if he was like a Darren Sproles type guy, yeah, you could be a kick returner. You could have that specialty. But the thing is, he totes the rock. But I think that when you look at Jada Byers has a phenomenal resume based off of his last season. Or excuse me, Jada Byers has a great resume. There we go. That's the better way to put it. Jada Byers has a great resume based off of his sophomore season. If he can come back this year, stay healthy, maybe get 1,500 yards and say, look at me, I have a 2,000-yard season and maybe a 1,700-yard season, I think that Jada Byers should be at the top of not just D2 HBCU rankings, but small school prospects as far as all guys going into the 2025 NFL draft. Jada Byers is a phenomenal running back, and I can't wait to see what his odds are going into the league. But he's not the only player. He's the player I'm looking at the most, but he is not the only player that I'm looking at. I also have guys like Kasey Hawthorne, Erick Hunter, and Elijah Williams, 3 MEAC prospects to preview as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Now, this is what all of the investors are using, both experienced and novice. I love that about Yahoo Finance. Because the biggest thing for me is sometimes I get overwhelmed with feeling like, oh, man, this is expert advice, or this is expert lingo, or this is what all the big wigs. I'm not at that point yet. Am I ready to take on this? Am I ready to use this tool? Maybe I need to use a beginner tool. The thing about Yahoo Finance is that you can use it as a beginner and then you will move up. So it's not something that expires. And it's not something that you have to have a bunch of prerequisites in order to use. Yahoo Finance is phenomenal. Wouldn't it be great to see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow that portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflations? Yahoo Finance is your place to be. It's just that simple. Now, listen, for a comprehensive breakdown of financial news and analysis, visit the brand that is behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That is the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today. It's the first of its kind, 24/7, all day, every day, live sports network on YouTube. We've already broken down Jada Byers, and you'll see me on there as well. Don't forget, you can go ahead and see this pretty face, goatee or beard. I'll still be there on Locked On Sports today. But we've broken down Jada Byers, and he is the premier player for me. And I understand that he may not be the premier player walking out because he's a Division II player that's rarely the guy. Even when Joshua Williams was the number one HBCU player picked through that draft cycle, he was not the premier player. Even when Willie Drew was the one of two players who were invited to the scouting combine and the Senior Bowl, it didn't feel like for the mass public he was the premier player. Everybody looked at Davius Richard. That was it was Davius Richard and it was everybody else for the masses. I considered Drew to be premier because of the things that he got. I felt the NFL treated him as premier, but that wasn't the biggest talking point. So I don't know if Jada Byers will occupy that role, but one of these players might. A Kasey Hawthorne, an Elijah Williams, an Erick Hunter. So let's break down those three players. And to be very clear, I am breaking down four players who I believe, if they do what they have been doing, will be undrafted free agents as a floor. And they have an ability to be a draft pick. You have draft selections, you have UDFAs, and then you have camp invites. I don't think that any of these four players will be a camp invite. I think they will all get a contract by an NFL team as long as they continue to do what they have done in the course of their career. I hate that things have to be perfect because like, oh, well, this guy doesn't do this or this guy. The standards are so much higher, but that's okay. I live with that. That's what it is. And let's kick it off with Howard athlete Kasey Hawthorne. It's not often that you walk out of college calling a player an athlete. 9 times out of 10, you call them whatever their position is. And for Kasey Hawthorne, that's a wide receiver. But at the same time, did I say he went to Howard? He went to Howard. But at the same time, he's so versatile that I have to call him an athlete. Because though he runs the ball, though he lines up at quarterback and does a wildcat, he is a wide receiver through and through. The only problem is he's a jack of all trades. And to me, that's a gift and a curse. When you're looking at being a jack of all trades, it's a quality thing because it means you can do so much. So now my vision for you can be on the left, it can be on the right, it can be in the middle, it can be in the back, it can be whatever you want it to be because he does so many things. So if you're an imaginative person, you can say, oh, I like Kasey Hawthorne as a kind of a scat back. Or I like Kasey Hawthorne as somebody who returns kicks. Or I like Kasey Hawthorne as a slot receiver, right? Like these are things that I can say about Kasey Hawthorne because I've seen him do so many different things. But at the same time, maybe I don't want a little bit everywhere. Maybe I want a lot in one specific role. And that's the thing about being a jack of all trades, because his most receiving yards in the season is 535, excuse me. 535 is his career high in a season as a wide receiver. And he's ran for about 100 and something yards. He never hit 200 as a running back or a rusher. Let me say that, not a running back, but a rusher. So when you're looking at these numbers, it makes me wonder, how are you going to value it? Because like I said, on one hand, oh, you can do everything. I know I can find a way to work with you. But on the other hand, I don't know if you are a specialist in anything enough for me to want to bring you on. That's the conundrum with it all. Well, in today's NFL, where offenses are evolving and motion becomes not just a thing that people do, but they become a priority. And it's almost like all of the best offenses have motion and they try to get you in mismatches. I think that Kasey Hawthorne is very well suited for that. A guy who you can motion from slot into the backfield. He's not as thick as a Deebo Samuel. Wow, I'm really in the NFL because I naturally said that I'm talking about muscular build. It's draft season for real, y'all. Like, dang, that's crazy. Anyway, I can't believe I just said that. Anyway, so he doesn't have the same build as a Deebo Samuel. So I'm not lining him up at running back. But there's times when I might motion him into the backfield, give him a sweep. Those are things that I would like to watch for from Kasey Hawthorne. But I also want to see him get more involved in the receiving game. Let him be a 800-yard receiver at the least. I would love to see those things because I think it will boost his stock. And I think that if his usage rate goes up, I think those numbers will go up a good amount as well. The next person, and G, you're going to love me for this one, Erick Hunter. Erick Hunter was part of one of, if not the best linebacking duos in HBCU football last year. It's one or two, and they have a strong argument for number one. And I may be such an Isaiah Major stan that I'm just saying, you know what, I'm a rock. And I watch a lot of FAMU. Like I told you, I watch a lot of FAMU. But Morgan State had them dogs. And this year, Erick Hunter will be back there by himself in the middle of the defense. But you know what? I think that he's more than equipped to do it. Because when you look at Erick Hunter does everything you want him to do on the field. He got sacks for Morgan State last year. He had almost 10 tackles for a loss, so that shows the ability to get into the backfield and create negative plays. Tackles are great, and he led the team in that as well. But tackles for a loss are the one thing you can look at on the box score and know that was a phenomenal play by the defense. It may not have been the player, but you know the defense forced a negative play, right? He even has 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles. He had a sack fumble that should have led to the victory for Morgan State versus Richmond in the opening of the season. Like, this is a nationally ranked team. This is a team that they're going to watch. He's like, oh, I want to see him against upper FCS talent. Well, he did against Richmond. And Erick Hunter performed well. They call him E40. Ugh. Because that's what you say every time he's on the field. Ugh. Right? Like, but what was that? What's the E40 line? Oh, I'm going to get killed for that. I'm not gonna mess it up. But when you look at Erick Hunter, this is a player who has performed at a high level for multiple years, and he was a leader of that defense, and he's a player who flies over the field. He's a little bit light. You want him to gain a little bit of weight, but I firmly believe that he has the skill set that will lend to him being a UDFA and possibly being a late-round draft pick due to his size. Linebackers are getting a little bit smaller, but it's kind of on that verge of them also starting to gain more size or placing a little bit more emphasis on having size in the middle of your defense, right? Erick Hunter's great, though. One of the reasons that he's able to be so great is Elijah Williams, who is the defensive tackle for Morgan State. And with Morgan State's defensive line, now those linebackers are able to fly. Elijah Williams stands 6'3", 270. So you're looking at average height. You're looking at below average weight, but he's going to be a 3 tech because at 270, you're not going to be a guy who's on the nose. And I would also look at 270 pounds for him to be a guy who prioritizes penetration into the backfield. I'm looking for him to be a guy who specifically is a pass rusher, and I'm going to need explosiveness. I think that film is going to be the most important thing because you won't get this next thing that I'm asking for until after the season. But when testing comes around, I need Elijah Williams to have a really good 10-yard split. I need his broad jump to be good. I would like to see his vert be really good because I think that if when testing rolls around, Elijah Williams can show the ability to be explosive, that's going to do wonders for his draft stock. Like I said, he's listed at 270 right now on the Morgan State Athletics website. I don't know if that's a overestimation or an underestimation. Maybe it's outdated. He's gotten a little bit bigger. Maybe it was just they kind of fudged numbers a little bit. But I'll say this. When it comes to Elijah Williams at 270 pounds, if he's going to be a run stopper, he's going to have to get through the line of scrimmage. He's not going to be a guy who just occupies space. So you're going to want somebody who is really good at block shedding. I can't wait to do my film breakdown of Elijah Williams and Erick Hunter because they're on the same defense. I cannot wait for that. At some point, I will. And then maybe I'll probably come on here and do it because it'll be summertime by that point. But these are 3 players that I'm looking at: Erick Hunter, Kasey Hawthorne, and then Elijah Williams. 3 MEAC players. I know Mr. Swack himself highlighting 3 MEAC players and a CIAA guy. I must have lost my location, but that's okay because we about to go right back to the South. They call me the mouth of the South for a reason, and I'm taking it to my roots. LSU versus Grambling women's basketball. For LSU, this continues a lot of trends, specifically their relationship with HBCUs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, when you look at FanDuel.com/Locked On, you got to go there to make every moment more. If you're new to FanDuel, you'll get $150 back in bonus bets, win or lose. There is no, I got to win in order to get this. Win or lose, you get $150 back in bonus bets when you put down a $5 bet. The NBA is here. Ant-Man is up and live on Friday. Thursday night, you'll have game 2 between the Thunder and the Mavericks. I'm missing right now as we're speaking. Oh, it just tipped off. But anyway, I'm missing the beginning of the Knicks versus Pacers. There's a lot of good series, but I really want to watch that Minnesota versus Denver series. I'm interested to see how game 3 goes, because if game 3 goes the way 1 and 2 have, we can wrap it up for the defending champions. But tell me what you think. Matter of fact, don't tell me what you think. Go to FanDuel.com/Locked On and tell them what you think. And remember, you get $150 back in bonus bets if you're new to FanDuel, if you put down a $5 bet, win or lose. Today's episode, or excuse me, as you wrap up today's episode, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. We've looked at the NFL draft enough, and we'll go back to it. Oh my God, I missed football. I know that we haven't been gone for long, but you don't understand the joy that speaking about this prospects just brought me. And I didn't know I was going to do that at the time. But now we go into the basketball realm, because this is still basketball season. The WNBA is about to tip off in, I think, 6 days. The NBA playoffs is going on. We hot, right? And in the midst of this big-time basketball moment, LSU has announced that they will be facing Grambling in next year's college basketball season. And the 2 schools will be facing off in Bossier City, Louisiana, for a women's basketball game. That is a really cool event, and it continues some of the trends that you've seen from LSU women's basketball. Now, this segment is going to be primarily about LSU, but it's about LSU's relationship with HBCUs, right? Because one trend it continues is the school in general playing HBCUs. In the last 2 years, football has played Southern. They played Grambling. I think Southern was 2 years ago. Grambling was this previous season. And that's just on a football tip. I wouldn't include baseball because they play a little bit more frequently, so I wouldn't really include them. But now you see women's basketball. They're going to be playing Grambling this year. So it just kind of continues the local relationship between LSU and their local HBCUs, which I love to see. But then for women's basketball specifically, they've been playing HBCU since Kim Mulkey has gotten there. And I'll tell you what I think is interesting, because remember, we're talking about trends. Football, LSU versus Southern versus Grambling. Now you got women's basketball going against Grambling. Now you have women's basketball for the last 2 years. They've picked Coppin State. Angel Reese has Baltimore roots. And Kim Mulkey has highlighted those roots. And it's something that interests me. Like, are you picking these schools specifically because of these players? Because when speaking about playing Grambling in Bossier City, they're not going to Grambling, they're going to Bossier City. Kim Mulkey also mentioned that one of her players, Michaela Williams, is from Bossier City. So it makes me wonder, are you playing these schools in these areas because of your players, right? Like, obviously you're not. Obviously, you're also playing these HBCUs because of the universities and all of those things. But I wonder if these locations are helped out by having the players. Angel Reese had Baltimore. Then you have Michaela Williams from Bossier City. And what's interesting about Bossier City is that it's not Grambling. Literally, it's an hour away. So it's a neutral site game. But that brings into another thing that they've been doing. All of these games have been away in the state of Louisiana. In the state of, excuse me, let me bring it back, because I didn't wrap up my LSU point, my HBCU point, excuse me. It's not just Coppin State. It's not just Grambling this year. They played Texas Southern, Alcorn, Mississippi Valley State, Langston University. Obviously, they played Jackson State in the NCAA tournament, but that doesn't really count as far as scheduling because they didn't pick that. But then outside of the HBCUs, you also see LSU going around and playing a bunch of Louisiana teams away from Baton Rouge. Now, Kim Mulkey has spoken about wanting to play Southern at Tiger Stadium and then give all of the proceeds to Southern for the NIL. I think that's really good. I don't know how. I don't know if it's going to get done because Tiger Stadium is an interesting venue. It's outside. It's just a lot of moving factors in that. But I also think that it means you see LSU versus Southern very soon. I don't think that that's far away because Mulkey has already expressed her desire to do it, and she hasn't talked to Southern at that point. But I'm sure they have spoken since then. Now you have Grambling. Anyway, every time that they've played an Louisiana school, they traveled to them. Tulane in New Orleans. I think it was Louisiana Lafayette in Lafayette. This one right here, you're playing Grambling in Bossier City. It's a neutral site technically, but Grambling's an hour from Bossier City. LSU is 4 hours. Like it's like 3:45. This is a good distance. It's a much closer game for Grambling. So I think that these are some really cool trends. The idea of the relationship between LSU sports, not just women's basketball, but sports in the local HBCUs of Grambling and Southern. Then you have the relationship and the trend of women's basketball playing multiple HBCUs, because I wonder if Grambling is going to be the only one that they play that year. Then you also have the trend of LSU going against and traveling to the area of opposing Louisiana schools, despite normally being the home team. I really enjoy this. This is great. I love the continuation of the trends because I love a good story. And having a repeated theme is one of the best parts of telling a story. Just ask Kendrick Lamar. That wasn't necessary. That was not necessary, but I'm not going to cut it either. I hope you don't cut me from your rotation, even if you are a Drake fan. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. All my certified lover boys. But until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.